great pleasure today for talking with Caroline Verth, who is the Program Coordinator of the Small Steps program at the Hobart City Mission. Caroline and I, we know each other because for about 18 months, I think. I was a volunteer mentor for one of the mums in the program, so that's how we came across each other through that. And when I was putting together the list of women that I wanted to speak to as part of my little project, you came into that list pretty quickly. Because when I was thinking about women who are, contributing to community in ways that sometimes we don't think about or we don't actually realise that is happening, I was really keen to talk to you about what you do and how you ended up doing that sort of work and what you enjoy in that work and how you you're finding that journey of your career in your life. So for the people who are watching the video, if you perhaps just take us through just a little background about yourself, whatever you want to share about your life or your career and how you ended up at Small Steps.
Okay, thanks Ali. So I guess I've been at Hobart City Mission now for 6 years, coming up for 6 years, and I started there. I did my final prac placement through the Bachelor of Social Work at Hobart City Mission, and was fortunate enough to be taken on as an employee after my prac had finished and my first role was as a family support worker, so it was very much working with families in the community, in their homes, and I guess the families were referred to the program because there had been identified some risk to the children in the family. It might be quite a mild sort of risk, the teenagers aren't going to school, or there was some low-level domestic violence that were impacting on the children's behaviours. And so if family support workers would go into the families' home and work with them to support them, to walk alongside them, to provide information to them around maybe some impacts of their behaviour. And it was a great role, and I did that for a couple of years. So prior to that, I was at uni for it took me 7 years to do a couple of degrees. So I did the Bachelor of Arts and then the Bachelor of Social Work, and during that 7 years I actually worked at the uni as well for 6.5 of those years, and for 5 of those years I was the personal assistant to the Vice-Chancellor at the time.
Wow.
It was a really good experience in terms of what I do now.
I didn't know that. That's quite a change.
Yes. In terms of coordinating the Small Steps program now, a lot of it is client focused. It's around the clients managing and working alongside them. But also there's a huge administrative component to that as well. So I feel that those 6 years in that administrative role at the university was a really valuable experience.
And so you talked about you started with a Bachelor of Arts, and then somewhere along the line you've gone, actually I'd like to go do social work, and you're working as the EA of the Vice-Chancellor, kind of different sort of roles with different outcomes attached to them. So what was the trigger for you at some point in there to go, actually I think social work's what I want to do?
It's really interesting because social work was always the goal.
Okay.
When I finished Year 12 here in Hobart, I finished Year 12 at Claremont College, and I was applying for uni at the time, and I didn't really know what to do, and I wasn't very good at science or sort of the math side of things, so I thought teaching was I had a little bit of an interest in. I had a friend who had, a family friend who had been a teacher, and I'd done some sort of workplace stuff with her, and I quite liked it, and I felt that it was something quite achievable for me. And I had a bit of a meltdown in grade 12, and I was like, oh gosh, I got quite stressed out with exams and essays and things like that, and I had a bit of a think about things, and I thought, I've spent the last 15 years in school, I'm going to go to uni for another 4 years to then go back into the classroom to be, you know, obviously in a different role.
Sure.
But that thought was just so overwhelming for me, and I thought I don't really have a huge passion to be a teacher. It's just something that I think is achievable for me.
Sure.
So I ended up going, you know what, I'm going to take a gap year, I'm going to go and travel the world. And I did, and I had a gap 7 years. And I went to the UK, and I lived and worked there for 4 years, and I travelled around the Middle East, and, you know, it was just a great time. And, you know, I was young and did jobs that, you know, I probably would never have thought that I would do. And I always knew that I would return to formal education because that was really important to me, and I knew that if I wanted a career and things like that, I knew that university would be a part of that. So I returned to Tasmania, and I wasn't quite ready for uni then, so I thought I'd get a job here, and it was 2000, end of 2001, and jobs were quite difficult to come by at that stage, particularly for somebody who was who had no formal qualifications. I'd had experience.
Just spent a gap
Yeah.
year. I know how to book travel.
Yeah. I know how to pull a pint.
Yeah.
But even here, like, you needed to you needed to get, you know, do a course for it, and I didn't have that anyway. So I spent 6 months just bumming around Hobart, I guess, and my brother at the time was living in Melbourne, and he said, why don't you come over here, you know, you'll be able to pick up a job easy over here, you know, cafes, you know, that, whatever. And so I said, oh, okay. So I went over to Melbourne, and I ended up staying there for 3 years.
Wow.
And I did a couple of odd jobs, but then I actually got a role on the public transport, the trams. Yeah. And it was at a time when they'd just got rid of the conductors on the trams, and so they put these tram attendants, you sort of roving person on the trams, and you could, you know, you check people's tickets to make sure they had the right one. So it was a really interesting experience, and I really loved that, and I met some wonderful people. And towards the end of that, my time in Melbourne, I was becoming ready to go, but I knew that I wasn't going to stay in the trams forever. So I don't know, somebody I think suggested to me that I go and see a career counsellor.
Sure.
We went through a bunch of different options, and I said, I always quite like the idea of psychology, and I think that, you know, that sort of helping people with their, you know, their issues. I quite like that idea, and I think that I would be quite good at it. I feel like I'm a good listener. I feel like, you know, of my friend group, you know, people come to me and ask me for help and advice. So I thought, and I really liked doing that. I liked being that person. So I said to the career counsellor, what about psychology? And she said, oh, well, you know, that's it's a 7-year degree, and, you know, and then you have to do an internship after, then you don't get paid, and I was like, oh, no. I don't have any money. So
That's right.
that doesn't sound good to me. Oh. And she said, well, what about social work? And I'd never heard, like, I'd
Never thought of it before.
well, I don't think I'd ever actually heard of. I hadn't had a life where I've ever come into contact with a social worker, and so I didn't really know what a social worker did. And so I went on. I was like, oh, and because she said, oh, University of Tasmania do a social work degree. And I was like, oh, that's because I knew that at that time I wanted to come back to Tasmania to do it. I had family support. It was relatively cheap living compared to Melbourne, and the university had a good name, and it was affordable as well.
So you came home.
Yeah, so I came home. Small Steps essentially is primarily a residential complex. It's accommodation for young women who are either pregnant or have a child up to the age of 5. And it was an idea born out of my manager. She worked in the child protection system for a long time, and she was in the response area, and she was she'd had a number of occasions where she'd removed a baby from a mother, a young mother, a teenage mother, from hospital, purely because that young mother didn't have any appropriate family support, and they didn't have any stable accommodation to return to after they left hospital. And it was a real gap in service. There were these children being removed, putting into state care, which is incredibly expensive, for reasons that we felt that could be, I guess, solved by providing this accommodation. But we didn't want it to be just about accommodation. So we're trying to, I guess, build the capacity of young mums to be able to be resilient and purposeful, I guess, members of community, whether that's, in whatever they choose that they want to do.
Aside of it being a job and career, like what drives you to turn up every day and do that sort of work?
Being that person for them, I think, is incredibly, it can be incredibly satisfying, I guess, being a constant in their life. A number of the young women that come to Small Steps have been, victims of domestic violence. They've had, a number of them have mental health issues, and a lot of those mental health issues are around being rejected by their families or their not rejected by their family, but their sort of the family support being conditional on them doing particular things, or them being I'll treat you this way if you do this for me, and it's sort of quite conditional. And a number of the girls, they haven't ever had any boundaries put in place for them, as children, as adolescents, and somebody to love them unconditionally or care for them unconditionally. And I think playing that role, or not playing that, or being that person for them, that's where we've started to see some of the changes in the residents. It's around, they can fuck up one day and I'm going to treat them the same as I always do, and that's with respect and care and, love, I guess, and acceptance that, that's who they are, and, I can see their struggles, and I want to support them and change when they're ready to change. But that sort of unconditional relationship, I guess, that is really important to them, and I see the benefits of that for them every day. And it's very small sometimes, and it's hard to find sometimes. But yeah, I think that's incredibly satisfying, and it makes me feel like the program is working, that the program is making changes, and it is having an impact. And it is small steps, and it is, we're not expecting to see young people change overnight just because we're there and we're offering new ways of being for them. We're not going to see the changes, over a week, over a month, over a year even. And what I say to volunteers sometimes, so they can get their heads around managing that emotional side of the role for them, is that we might not see it with this person here, but they might make changes in their style of parenting and in the way that they parent, and their child, when they're coming around to having children, that's the generation that will start to see those, and we won't see it. And so sometimes it can be a very sort of, that's a tough notion to get your head around, that you're doing this and you're putting this effort in, and you're giving these opportunities to young women, but not seeing the changes immediately. As a part of being a full-time mum, there are responsibilities, and your responsibilities are to raise a child that can, by law you need to get them to school. You need to give them opportunities to get education, to be educated, and there's a responsibility also to raise a child that is physically healthy but also mentally healthy as well. And that what you're talking about is, well, what my values around a physically healthy child it might be somebody who looks, a child that looks clean and has clean clothes, but that might not be a priority for a young mum that comes from a disadvantaged background, or a background where that isn't valued. And as a worker in that space, there's a huge amount of acceptance that needs to come with that.
From you?
From me,
Yeah.
from me. And for me to check in with myself and going, well, hang on, is that about me, or is that, what is that about? And, that's where critical reflection and, reflecting on your decisions and your thoughts around that. And I, do that, and constantly doing that in my role around, well, is that just my value, or is that something that is posing a risk to the child? If they've, if it's not, then that's a decision that they've decided. And I need to accept that, and I need to provide no judgment around that, and and that's the space in which I work. And it's obviously something that drives my decision making and my interactions with young mums as well, is how do I offer up to them a new way of doing things, because at the end of the day they're teenagers as well, and I haven't met one teenager yet that wants to be told what to do.
If someone was to ask you what makes you happy, what would you say?
The sense of satisfaction, I guess, in the role, and with my private life as well. I have an immense sense of satisfaction. Not every day, but most days, and I guess that's the key. More days than not. Meaningful relationships. My friends are really important to me, and I work with a raft of young women who don't socialise well, and they don't have fantastic social skills, and their relationships suffer for it, and they suffer for it, I think, with their resilience and coping mechanisms in terms of how they are in relationships. It's very important for me to have good friends, and I have a bunch of friends that I've known since I was, sort of 16, 17, 18, and that's really important to me, and they make me happy. Something I think about and has driven me to make decisions about my career and my path as well is my parents. That mum spent 40 years in a job, that she had when she returned to Tasmania. My dad, spent significant periods of life in roles, in different jobs, and neither of them particularly liked their jobs. And that's really motivated me to go, to find something that I really feel passionate about and I have an attachment to, but also not to be afraid to go, what, this is not what I thought it was going to be. I'm going to change it.
How do you hope to be remembered with your contribution or your life?
Yeah, I guess in reference to, and I guess, because that's where I am at the moment, in reference to small steps, I spend, 5 days a week, sometimes more, with the residents in a residential, so it's at their home. I feel like I'm coming to their home every day, and I'm a part of their child's life. Their child recognises me. I'm actually quite a significant person in the child's life as well, as opposed to, the resident's mum who maybe sees her daughter, once a fortnight or once a month or once a week or something. I'm seeing these children every day, and I think if that could be something that I'm remembered by, is not essentially from the children's perspective, but from their mum's perspective of, Caroline. Oh, you remember Caroline? She was, she ran that program that we lived at for how long, and as a sort of, I guess, a solid, somebody who's there for them.